We have done almost a year's worth of weekly Sublime Text videos here on the channel. And if you've watched those videos or just use Sublime in general, you'll know that one of the things it tries to do is stay out of your way as much as possible so that you can just get on with the work that you're doing. And sometimes you have to work with groups of related files. For example, all the files related to the web page that you're working on, or all of the source files to your latest coding project, or maybe just a group of unrelated files that you need to edit. And when it comes to things like that, fewer things can slow you down faster than trying to find and open the files that you want to be editing. Now, as it turns out, Sublime has a pretty powerful feature for making this ridiculously easy and fast, but it can be a little bit intimidating to those that are unfamiliar with how it works. And so, in this week's video, let's discuss the Sublime Text Goto Anything panel. Hello, fellow Sublime Text fanatics. ODAT Nerd here, wondering if his slightly creaky voice is ever going to get better, and welcoming you to this week's video on the Goto Anything panel in Sublime Text. Now, the Goto Anything panel allows us to very quickly and easily locate the files that we would like to work with next and open those files. We can also preview them. We can even decide where inside the files we'd like to be when the file is actually open. And this is a very powerful technique for quickly navigating around in a project, particularly if you have lots of files open, but it also is of value even if you only have a few different files. Now, this functionality lives up here in the Go To menu, and in particular, we're going to be using in this exclusively the Goto Anything item, the one that is selected by default, which as we can see here is bound to the key Control P on Windows. That's the same key binding on Linux. It's also Control P there. And on Mac OS, it is Command P. But as always, if you're ever in doubt in what keys are bound to what commands, look in the menu and Sublime will tell you what is currently bound to that, even if you've changed it in your own binding. And if I was to choose that command now, we don't really see a whole lot of stuff here in this list. This is just a completely empty, it basically looks like the command palette if the command palette didn't have any commands in it. We can type stuff in here, but it doesn't seem to have any effect. And that's because the Goto Anything panel draws from what we refer to as the file catalog, the list of files that we've told Sublime we're interested in working with inside of any particular window in Sublime Text. And that is to make it easier for you because your hard drive will have hundreds of thousands of files on it spread all over everywhere, and you'll know yourself every time you want to open a file, you got to find the correct folder, you got to drill down inside of it, you have to find the file you want. Works, not the greatest thing for speed if you want to be jumping in and out of files while you're working on things. So Sublime has what we refer to again as this file catalog, the list of files that you're interested in working, and the Goto Anything panel draws on that list. Now, the source of the file catalog comes from essentially two places, and the first one is files that you just happen to have open. And this is the case whether you have folders open in the sidebar or not. For example, right here, this is just an empty window. It has absolutely nothing in it, no files, no folders, and thus the Goto Anything panel has nothing in it. But if we were to open any file, that will populate the file catalog with that particular file. So for our purposes here, I'm going to use the view package file command, and let's go ahead and open just this default add line before a Sublime macro. This is the content that comes from the default package. Now that I have a file open here, when I press Control P, we can see that there is exactly one item in this list. It's the add line before .sublime macro, and we're seeing here this file has two lines. The first one is the name of the file, and the second one is its full path on the hard drive, because we could have multiple files or folders open, maybe with the same names, maybe not, and we generally refer to files by name, but we would like to know where exactly they're located. This is one way to populate this, and again, this will work with any file that you happen to have opened in this window, regardless of how you opened it. The other thing that we can do is open folders in the window, and if you've ever used projects or workspaces in Sublime Text, then you're already familiar with this. If you're unfamiliar with those concepts, there is a video on the channel that discusses them and why they can really make your life in Sublime, more sublime. But just to touch on on the various ways that we can do that here. Up in the File menu, there's an item named Open Folder. If you choose that, that'll open a file dialog browser for you to find the folder that you'd like to have open. You can also go to the Project menu where there's an item down here labeled Add Folder to Project. And again, this will work even if you don't have a project. I don't have a project in this window right now, but this command allows you to add a folder to the current project because perhaps you're setting up this window to become a project. And the other way to do this is via drag and drop. And so I have this folder over here on my other desktop that is the source code for my override audit package, and I'm going to drop that in, and now we can see the sidebar over there has the contents of my override audit package source code and that sort of thing. And now if I use the Goto Anything panel again, when I pop this up, we see much more content here in the list. First thing is that file that we have opened, and the remainder of these are the actual files that are part of the folder that I have open there in the sidebar. And of course, you could have multiple folders open in the sidebar if you wanted to, and those will all appear here in this list. Now, there is a little bit of settings that you can use to control exactly what files appear in the sidebar, which makes them part of the file catalog. You can hide files or folders from that if you would like. And you can also mark some files as being binary files, which means that they won't appear in this list or be relatively openable otherwise or searchable, because if they're binary, you probably don't want to open them even if you want to see them in the sidebar. And the topic of how you control what's in the sidebar is going to be a topic for next week's video. We don't want to dive into that here. So if you're unfamiliar with that topic, you might want to drop a subscribe on the channel to make sure that you are informed when that video drops next week. But now that we have a folder open in this window, and I'm just going to go ahead and close that file for the time being, we're all set to show you the various ways that you can use the Goto Anything panel to make your life better in Sublime. There's a few different things that the Goto Anything panel can do, but let's discuss first what you actually see inside of it. So I'm going to open it again, and we can see here, this is a list of every file that is currently loaded in the sidebar in the left. And this is a recursive list, so it's every file in the override audit folder that's open, and it's also every file in every folder that exists in the override audit folder, and every file that exists in every folder inside of each of those, and so on recursively all the way down. Now, as I mentioned briefly, there are settings in Sublime that you can use to tell it exactly what files it should and shouldn't pull from any folder that you have open. That changes what appears here. So what appears in the sidebar list might not necessarily reflect the whole of reality of what exists on the hard drive, but that's part of tuning the file catalog to just the files that you want to be working with. And if you're unfamiliar with how to do that, remember next week's video, we're going to discuss the various ways that you can pull that off. Now, inside of the panel itself, each file is listed with two rows. The first one is the name of the file, and the second one is its full path, but its full path relative to the folder that it's contained in the sidebar. So for all of these files at the top, each line is identical because each of these files is in the root of this particular override audit folder, so it's not showing me that these are part of override. That's just assumed. If you had two folders or more open in the sidebar, then the name of the folder would also appear in the name of the file so that you can disambiguate two files that perhaps have the same name but exist in different parent folders in the sidebar. And if you have files open that aren't contained in any of the folders, then they're not relative to anything. They'll always be an absolute file name. We saw that just a second ago in the previous part when we looked at the default package file. The name that appeared in there was the fully qualified name to where that exists inside of the packages file. That's because it's not part of one of the folders. Now, there's of course a few things that we can do in this list. We can scroll through it and see previews of files that are here. And we can see as I'm selecting these, the content of the file behind the panel is changing, but there's no tab associated with it. And that's because selecting files from this list shows you a transient preview of the file that you're currently selecting here. And because it's transient, it's not associated with a tab. So if I push escape, that whole file just goes away. I didn't want to edit that, so this goes back to the state that it was previously in. If I open the panel again and decide I wanted to open this Get Attributes file, I could push Enter, And now there is a tab for this file because I have opened it. And of course, if I come back into the panel, as I scroll through here, we again see the transient preview showing us what the content of the file under the cursor is here in the panel, but the tab remains the same. And you can see it actually gains the focus when I select the file that it actually represents, and the focus goes away from the tab. It gets a little bit dimmer when it's not. And again, here I have the changelog selected, but that's not the content of the file. When I close the panel, it goes back to the actual thing. So we're seeing previews there, transient previews. Now, along with opening one file here, you can also open multiple files easily as well. So say, for example, I wanted to work with not the license of this project and the changelog both at the same time. I could easily come down here. Now, what I could do is push enter to open this and then open the panel again and find the changelog entry. But what I can also do is use the right arrow key to pin this file. So when I push that key, we'll see the content of the view remains the same, but there's now a tab labeled license because this file has been opened. But I'm still inside of the Goto Anything panel, so I can choose the changelog file, which again we see previewed here, and neither of those tabs are focused because that's not the content of this file. And when I push the right arrow key, that file opens as well. Now there's 3 tabs up there, and I can go ahead and close the panel, and I'm back to being able to work on these particular files. I'm going to go ahead and close all of those files now. Now, that's handy for what it is, but if you have a lot of files in here, then of course, this is going to be a real pain in the butt to scroll all the way down through all of these things to find the file that you're actually interested in. So the other way that we could do this is, of course, to type some filter text into this panel at the top to filter the list of items that we're interested in. And here, people sometimes get confused into thinking that because these are files and folders, that you need to actually type the full name of the file that you're interested in. Like if I wanted the license file, I would have to type license to be able to find it. And we can see that works, but even L works to be able to find the license file in this particular case. We can see there that the fuzzy matching is finding for us all the files that have L in them, and Sublime has categorize them internally and rank them based on how likely it is to be the file that we're interested in opening. And license is its most probable guess here. So that one's at the top. All the other files that contain an L somewhere in their name are also present, like symbol list, default Linux, Sublime key map, and so on. You can see the letters that are matching the filter sort of lighten up a little bit. The nice thing about this is, much like the command palette, this is a learning system. So I've typed L here, and it's decided to give me license. But if I actually wanted the symbol list for packages.tm preferences, I can use L to choose this to open this file. Now it's open. If I was to close that or come back to this at a later time, when I open the panel and type L, it's automatically, even though the list of items is still ordered by what it thinks they probably are, it's automatically selected the item that I chose for this search term last time. So as you gain more familiarity with the panel, it just gets faster and better because it's learning what you type to find the files that you're interested in. And we can do a few different things here. Now, there's a few different init.py files that we're interested in here. So we could type .py to filter this list to all of the Python files, and we can see all 3 of them here. So that's one way we could do that. If we know the name of the file contains the text init, we can type init, and now we've found them all as well. And if there's more than one of them in here, we could use the arrow keys to scroll if we wanted to. We could also add an extra term like lib, and now we've really narrowed down into this thing, and we can open exactly the file we want. Or maybe we want the one from source as well. And we can even put these terms in the opposite order as well, because if we know that we definitely want a file that's a source file, then we can type source. And now when we type init, we don't even see the one from lib because we've determined that we want the one from source. It's automatically thrown those ones away. And similarly, if we were interested in one of the commands in here, I could type commands. And now when I type init, it just immediately hits that as well. And it can be a little bit of a learning game to determine what works best for you and the files and projects that you're working with, what would work best for you as a search term here in the panel in order to narrow this list down to find the file that you want. A common thing that I see being asked on Stack Overflow is people working with web frameworks where the same file name is used for everything, like say index.js, but the folder that it's in represents what it's actually for, whether it's the model or the view or the controller for a particular thing, or if there's more than one component, the component name is the folder and the file name is the same inside. People tend to think that they need to type a big, long, complicated path into this thing, but actually you don't. You could just type part of the name of your component and then the name of the file that you're interested in. You can easily narrow it down. And once you manually choose the file, as we saw, the next time you type the same thing, it'll just automatically choose the same file. So it makes it a lot faster the second time around. So I think it's easy to see how powerful the Goto Anything panel is. With just a couple of quick search terms, you can narrow in and find the file that you want to open. You could, of course, always use the file open dialog or navigate to the file you want to open in the sidebar as well. But if your folder structure is a little complicated, it could take more time than that quick search. And remember that the Goto Anything panel remembers what file you chose for any particular search term. So once you get used to using this as a system, you can quickly get back to the same file every time you want to open it by using the same search term as well. But along with just opening a file, we can also apply operators to files that we've opened in order to specify where inside them we want to go. So if I'm just going to quickly open the core.py file. This is a Python file. That's the core of the override audit package. And if I was to open the Goto Anything panel and use the colon key, we're now being able to specify a line in the file. Currently, the active line is line 1, but if we were interested in line 100, we could type 100 and the active line jumps to that. And if I push enter, the file will go to that line. If I did the same thing and went to line 1, we can see the active line is now line 1, but when I push escape, the view goes back to where it was before. So if you needed to peek at another line somewhere in the file, you can do this very quickly and easily using the Goto Anything panel. And another thing that we can use in here is the @ key to provide a symbol list. Now, the symbols that you see depend on the type of file that you're editing. Essentially, this is information that the syntax author has given to Sublime by doing something in the syntax definition in use to mark certain things as being interesting, and then they also provide some metadata to Sublime to tell it what things should appear in this particular list. So the list of things that you see will look different depending on the language of the file that you're using and the syntax. And if you're doing something with like a text file or something that doesn't have a lot of syntax highlighting in it, then the symbol list will end up being empty, so you won't see anything in here. But if we wanted to find, say, for example, the log function, we can scroll to that very easily and we can see it defined back there, and I can hit enter, and now that is the place where this code is located. And similarly, if I wanted to know about the settings, we can find the OA setting function and jump to it very quickly as well. Now, both of these things are probably fairly familiar to you, because if you go to the Goto menu, there's a Goto symbol function, which here is bound to Control R, and there's a Goto line function, which is bound to Control G. Of course, those would be different keys if you're on Mac OS. And if I push Control R, I get that same panel. This is actually the Goto Anything panel. If I push backspace, it goes to an empty list because we haven't told it that it was supposed to display files. But just a quick search term of space and backspace, and we have the list of files, and we can go from here. And similarly, the Control G does the same thing for typing in a line, but we could also backspace out, push space, and backspace, and again, here's the list of files. So this just shows the utility with which the Goto Anything panel allows you to do things. Now, there's one other term that you can use in these items, and that is the hash key to provide a search. So if I did this and typed the hash, what we end up with is a list of all of essentially the words that appear in this file. And we could choose any one of them to skip to the first location of that particular word here in the buffer. But more than that, it actually sets up a search. So if I push the key to find the next thing that matches the current search term, we can easily jump to all of those as well. So this can also be a fast way to navigate around. Now, this is actually bound to the key control semicolon here on Windows. It does the exact same thing all in one shot, although I'm not sure offhand what that is bound to on Linux and Mac OS. You'd have to check the default key bindings in order to find that out. Now, the nice thing about these three operators is you may have known that you can use them to jump to a line in a file or to a symbol in a file, but did you know that you could actually do that while you're opening a file as well? Because if I type Control P, I can type core at log, and I've opened the file right here at the log function. That works all in one shot. Or I could type core colon 100 and jump directly to line 100 here in the core file. Or if I wanted to, I could type core hash return and get that same search as we just saw a second ago going while opening the file at the same time. It also behooves me to point out that the Goto Anything panel can be useful for previews as well. As we've seen, if we were to open a particular file like this, we could quickly go to line 100 if we wanted to. If we wanted to peek at line 50, we could use the key to go to 50, see what's there, get an idea of something that we need to remind ourselves of, and push escape to go back to where we actually started. But the same thing could be used to preview files as well. So if I went to the README file, I could preview line 100 in the README file, or line 150 in the README file, get the information that I'm interested in. You could also use those other items as well. And once I'm done seeing what I needed to see in the README file to refresh my memory, I push escape and I'm back to where I started. And we can do all of that without touching the mouse. It's easy to see that whether you're working with a couple of unrelated files or several hundred files spread across many folders on your hard drive, the Goto Anything panel is an invaluable technique for finding not only the files you want to open, but also the points inside of those files that you need to be looking at in order to get your work done. And that's going to do it for this video. I hope you found this information informative and it's going to make your life a little bit more sublime. And if that's the case, please do use those buttons down below to thumb, subscribe, and share as you deem appropriate. And if you have any questions, comments, requests for clarifications, or suggestions for other Sublime Text topics you'd like me to cover in a future video, drop that good stuff down in the comment section below this video. And until the next video, this is ODAT Nerd asking you to please have a sublime day.